So just to kick off, thank you again to our ASBP Reuse Now sponsors. Our gold sponsor is Cleveland Steel and Tubes, with silver sponsors being Optima and a new sponsor, the Concrete Centre, and bronze sponsor being Reusefully. Kath is being one of our presenters today. So, quick welcome introduction from myself, and then we've got five speakers today. Katherine Adams from Reusefully, Jade Cohen from Qualis Flow, Chloe Sawyer and Salvo Gangemi from McLaren, and then Keith O'Flynn from Sisk. Then we've got half an hour Q&A, so please keep your questions either till the end or just pop them in the chat as we go through, and some of the questions may be answered by the presenters as we go through the presentation section, or I'll pick up on questions as we get to the panel and then due to close at 2. So just to give you a quick overview on the Alliance for Sustainable Building Products, some of you may know us well. I know there's quite a few members on the session today. Others that aren't so aware, we're a not mission-led sustainability organisation with the mission to accelerate the transformation to a healthy, low-carbon built environment. We've got lots of different aspects of our work that we undertake to do that. As you can see there on the pillar, different pillars, health and well-being, resource efficiency and whole life carbon, obviously very much that circular economy and embodied carbon piece being intrinsically linked, ethics and transparency, technical performance and social value. Our membership is really diverse, very much focusing to start off with on product manufacturers, but now over the years we've got architects, engineers, consultants, contractors, really wide variety of disciplines, very broad church. And we've got a number of different working groups that we work with around reducing plastics, healthy paints and finishes, and natural fibre installation. And lots of different reports, research projects, guidance. The Reuse Now campaign information is obviously also on the website. I'd really encourage you to have a look at all the work that we've been doing. A lot of it is available free of charge. Some of it is just for our members, but the majority of it's free of charge. So please do take a look. The Reuse Now campaign has been going for a couple of years now. We look at different deep dives. So we've done the reuse of glass partitioning systems last year. We're working on the reuse of doors at the moment, and we're going to be looking at the reuse of bricks later on this year, just really to try and look at some of the gaps there are in people's knowledge and understanding how to reuse particular products and materials. And then also looking at some really holistic systems-led aspects of reuse and circularity, like we're doing today, really, in terms of waste reduction. So other events that we've got on the website, we've got a materials morning coming up later on this week, a moisture monitoring in-person event next week, and our Healthy Buildings conference, which is one of our key in-person events taking place on the 26th of February. Just a few housekeeping things. As I mentioned, you can add questions onto the Q&A. Sorry, not in the chat. I said in the chat. Please put it in the Q&A function. You can upvote and comment on other people's questions. Please don't use the raise hand option. We can unmute you when we get into the Q&A section if you do want to ask questions verbally and we have the chance to do so. If you have any problems, please drop Larry a message in the chat. And as you probably noticed, we do record our webinars. If you prefer not to be recorded, then just tick send anonymously when you ask your question. So we're going to get into the main piece now, but I just kind of wanted to say a few words around waste, really, with it being one of the construction industry's most entrenched challenges. And as you'll all be aware, our sector's not alone in this. You know, there's a lot of statistics and information around about how much food we throw away and how many meals that equates to, and yet there's people that haven't got food to put on their plate every day. You know, equally in terms of construction materials, there's a lot of community projects that perhaps don't get undertaken because they can't afford the materials to be able to build those community facilities. You know, it's crazy that we're wasting so much on one hand, and yet we've got an issue of planetary finite resources, but also more locally, you know, examples of projects where they can't get the resources um, to undertake those projects. I think despite an increased focus on sustainability and with that carbon emissions, there's large volumes of valuable materials still being lost on projects every year, often because waste is designed into systems, contracts, and behaviours from the outset. And I think it's really difficult to try and to shift that system, although there's a lot of effort being made to try to. Our presenters are going to explore the scale of the issue and why current practices sometimes fail to support meaningful reduction, but looking particularly around how our waste and resources can be better tracked, measured, and understood, and sharing lots of best practice examples. So we've got the issue being presented, the size of the problem that's still very much in evidence, despite efforts to try and reduce our waste, but then looking at solutions around how these best practices and tools and processes are being implemented and using incentives and behaviour change initiatives to ensure improvements are embedded and sustained. So without more ado, I'm going to stop sharing and pass on to Katherine.
Thanks, Debbie. Let me just get my slides up. Can you see them okay?
Yes,
Yep,
thank you.
all good.
Put them on full screen. Yeah, great, thanks.
Yeah, great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the invite to speak. I'm two-hatted. Well, I've got a few hats, but today I'm on my Reusefully hat. But some of you may also know me as Technical Director for ASBP as well. So I'm really pleased to speak about this. Personally, I've been working in construction and demolition waste, which includes waste reduction, for 25 years now, which is a long, long time. And a lot of that used to be at BRE. In fact, I was one of the people that helped develop smart waste back in the day. Some of you may use that. And smart waste actually stands for some things: site methodology for, oh my goodness, site methodology for auditing, reducing, and targeting waste. And that was done sort of, goodness, 20 years ago, because we were very much, you know, if you can't manage something if you can't measure it. So we've been going at this a while. I think it has changed, but very slowly, as in a lot of things happen in construction, unfortunately. Anyway, reusefully, it's there's 10 of no 9 of us, soon to be 10, hopefully, of us, where we provide all different advice on circularity in the built environment. It's quite good because we'll get our hands dirty going onto site, going around buildings, but we also like to work and are privileged to work on the standards and regulations, and so work with government. And it's quite nice to have that practical bent to what we say. And this is our team. I like to say we're a mix of experience and youth. That just means some of us are quite old, been doing this a while. And as I say, we work in the UK, but we also work across sort of Europe where we can. Right, so I'm just going to sort of give a bit of an overview, really, and then leave it to the rest of the speakers to do a bit more of a deep dive. It's always good to remind ourselves where we are statistics wise. And one of the issues is that our statistics at a national level aren't that great in telling us what is happening. Construction and demolition waste is grouped together, and that's quite problematic because we know that the waste causes from construction sites as opposed to demolition sites is quite different. So what I'm going to present, these are some draft figures. Please don't share because I will be updating them. So this is part of work I do with the Green Construction Board, Resources and Waste and Circularity Group, but they are based on national statistics. And what we're trying to do is just show the amount of waste that's generated, but also make that relative to construction output. So that's the orange line there. Why they're draft? Because we haven't necessarily taken into account inflation. So that trend line could change slightly. But you can see there is a slight general trend of construction demolition waste going down from relative wise. But if you look at absolute numbers, it's really not going down that much. And obviously, all that material needs to be transported around, sent to waste facilities, etc., etc. So there's a huge impact just in terms of managing all that waste. And this just shows you, this is just for mineral waste, what really happens to it. As we know, we're very good at not sending that much to landfill anymore when it comes to construction and demolition. And you can see sort of the different elements there. Most of it's recovered, but it's very hard to know if we assume some of that's downcycling, a lot maybe going to restore quarries, for instance, land restoration and that sort of thing. This is more for excavation waste, and you can see here figures with and without dredging soils. So dredging soils are what they say, excavation material being dredged from rivers and canals and that sort of thing. And most of that does get reused or recovered in one way, shape or form. With excavation waste, the trend's gone down, but then it's gone slightly up. It's quite hard to show trend figures for excavation waste because there's quite a lot of factors that can affect it. So you can have a few big projects that can skew that quite substantially. Soils is where the issue is, though, when it comes to landfill, in that most of it is still, well, I say most of it, around half is still landfilled, and then with quite a proportion also backfilled, which is seen as a recovery option. So there's still a lot of work to do on soils and landfill. So we've had landfill tax for quite a long time now. I would say it's probably been one of our most effective environmental taxes. I think it's probably one of the highest landfill taxes in the world. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it is. And you can see when it started back in 1996 to what it is now. So it went from £7 to, I think this year it's going to be £126. That's for the standard rate. And that has been a real effective policy of reducing the amount of waste that's going to landfill. As I said, not much construction material does go to landfill, excluding the soils anyway. There was a consultation from government fairly recently about making the inert rate equivalent to the standard rate. So the inert rate at the moment is £4 and it's going up to £8. So it rises as the retail price index. But there was looking at trying to make equality between those two rates. That got knocked down big time, largely because some of the house builders and others said, you know, this could cost an extra sort of 15 grand, 50 grand for each house. I'm not quite sure how they came up with those figures. But anyway, just to sort of say, you know, not much waste is going to landfill, and why that really works is money at the end of the day. Something that's on the horizon, which I think is going to be more significant for the construction industry, because we are doing a bit of analysis also on how much waste from construction and demolition does go to energy from waste. And that seems to be rising, probably more on your sort of foam products, insulation, plastics, all those sorts of things, the stuff that's hard to recycle at the end of the day. So we're going to be seeing this applied to the incineration sector, energy from waste sector. And what it will do, it will require people that run incinerators to pay a carbon allowance for the carbon that's being produced. So this will be fully applied from 2028. It's unknown really how much the cost will be, but some think it could be a 50% increase in gate fees, dependent on where the carbon price is set, and also if you're doing carbon capture storage, that will also sort of benefit, I guess. So one to sort of have a key look at really, because that's going to affect how much it's going to cost to put things through the incineration route. And material costs. It's always interesting looking at material costs because there's always spikes and dips, as you can see from that figure there. But I just saw this today, funny enough, this headline popped up in my inbox. Annual construction material prices more than double in 20 years, which is huge, really. And then you can see the percentage change on the left. These are all national statistics. There's quite a good record of these statistics. But you can see, and it can vary quite a bit, but you can see that wood, quite a lot of the M&Es going up in price, ironmongery, but then conversely, other areas do go down, depending on the price of the commodity. Just to note of the different sort of import, export material and different balances is there. I guess the general gist, though, and if anyone's working in contracting and buying materials, is that materials have largely gone up in price, which also makes waste ridiculous when you think about it. Some of the work we've been doing, again with the Green Construction Board, is we had this route map a few years ago now, but it's still very relevant, and we are looking to update it. And I think it's from 2021. And part of this, we did look at reduction of waste, as you would expect, and what the true cost of waste is. So I'm just going to flash up a few sections that cover this. So there's designing out waste here. And our real sort of issue here was that waste reduction targets become commonplace in most construction projects or waste intensity benchmarks. And by 2030, we have some sort of target where costs are reduced through designing out waste and material optimization. So this is one of the challenges, really. We've been very good at diverting waste from landfill, but it would be interesting to know how many companies, projects have really robust waste reduction targets in place that are actually sort of making a difference for the amount of waste that's being generated. And what does that mean from a cost perspective? And again, similarly, on a similar vein, the route map looked at how we could get better data, and a part of that is reporting on waste at a project and company level. As I just showed you, the national data is not great if you want to, dive into it and make any sort of, reasonable, educated sort of asks from it, if you like. So our asks here were really to develop contractors to develop key performance indicators and benchmarks and measuring the true cost of waste on all relevant projects. And we did a bit of this, was very much back of the envelope calculations, but we thought that roughly back in 2021, you'd have about 30 million tonnes of waste that is coming from new build activities. If you equated that to the true cost of waste, that equates to 11 billion a year. So that's the cost of the waste, the cost of the materials, the cost of labour, adding some VAT in as well. So trying to get everyone to measure that at a company level would be quite impactful. Whether they want to share that and sharing with their board how wasteful they are is questionable. So true cost of waste. There isn't that many studies available at all, I could find anyway, and I've been doing this a long time. Some may remember a study a very long time ago, which AMEC did, which shows this sort of different skip price of about £1,300 per skip. That really does need to be revisited. I think Zero Waste Scotland did a fair bit, and you can see some guidance here. They've got a calculator actually to try and look at what the true cost of waste is. It is quite complicated, so I think you may need a lot of time to fill that in. Some of the other work that we've been doing on Reusefully is wastage rates, and we've been looking at wastage rates for quite a long time, and the crap data, pardon my French, that relates to it. So, we know that all projects factor in wastage allowances, if you like. When we ever talk to sort of the cost people and the people that write the cost books, they can never really give a proper answer, I guess, in terms of how they came up with that wastage allowance. I guess it's just been in there a long time. There always will be a bit of waste, we know that, but the issue is how much you can reduce that wastage rate to make it, viable for the project, really. So what we're looking at is the difference of the quantity of materials that are required and the actual quantity of materials ordered and delivered to site. We did a bit of work with the MPA, trying to look at wastage rates for blocks, concrete blocks, and ready mix concrete. It was really tricky to get any data. It's very hard to match what comes into a project in terms of product and what goes out in terms of waste, and trying to track that through can be very difficult. I know Qflow will talk a bit about their system in a minute and how they try to do that a bit better. So we've got, and there's no national study really been done on wastage rates for a very long time as well. They're also underpinned in our whole life carbon and life cycle assessments as well. So they are quite important. Anyway, so we came up with some new wastage rates for concrete blocks and ready mix concrete. Oh, sorry, my phone's going. I'm gonna have to let me put my headphones in. Sorry, guys. Can you hear me now? Oh,
Yep, that's fine, Kath. I'm
Yeah,
here.
sorry about that. Anyway, just yes, where was I? Wastage rates. Yes, so that's my call of action really. If we can all get better wastage rate data and what is actually feasible is really important thing to do. Right. I'm going to bring in lean construction here because lean construction's been and I think more companies do this. It's been around for quite a while, obviously. What I really like about lean construction is this root cause analysis. So if you have got waste, how it works is you ask 5 times what the cause of that waste is, and then you get to the sort of the actual rump of the issue, if you like. So working out what the causes of the waste is sort of really important, and it's just equating material waste costs to other sort of issues which are of immense importance. Rework, how much of waste is related to rework. Figures here are massive in terms of the amount rework cost companies. And if I was doing that root cause, well, I've got plasterboard waste. Why? Because there was rework. Why did that rework happen? Was it due to bad installation, poor material quality, not having the design drawings, having to move something to get to something else, etc., etc. There is some useful info. There isn't as much as there used to be. RAP back in the day had loads of different case studies. Supply Chain Sustainability School has a fair bit, and I helped with others doing this measuring and reporting waste in the built environment, a practical guide. So do have a look at that if you've got time. And as ASBP, we have done work on looking at packaging and how you can reduce that. And the Zero Waste Scotland have got some info as well. Right, last but not least, it's really, in my mind, really understanding your waste, and that means looking at it in a granular way. Concentrate on the waste that are causing you the most issues. It's very hard to look at everything. So if it's costing you more, if it's got more of an environmental impact, for example, as I said, look at the root causes. We have lots of numbers contractors do about how much waste is being generated, but actually sort of working out why some of that waste is being generated could be packaging, for example, and that's, you know, that's quite different in terms of how you can reduce that. Set waste intensity benchmarks. Provide resource. I know a lot of sites can be very resource constrained, as in people. So it's very difficult to get anything done that may be different than just shoving everything in a skip, for example. Incentivize. I was looking at Taylor Wimpey yesterday, and I think 15% of their project manager's bonus comes from reducing waste, for example. But I'm sure others will talk about the subcontracts and how that can work with the subbies. And then share our findings and learnings. You know, waste can obviously be an upstream thing related to designers, but then it can also be downstream, if you want to call it that. Can manufacturers do a bit better in the products that they supply, etc. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Kath. That was really interesting. Hopefully I'll come back. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I think that the wastage allowance piece, that's something that's relatively new to me in the last sort of 12 months or so. I wasn't aware of the fact that you know, so many products, when you look at the cost books, actually have that wastage allowance already included in, which I think is quite scary from a systems level perspective. But yeah, it was great that you had those takeaways at the end. I'm sure there's lots of people can lots of those points to be familiar to people as to-dos that they've already got. Moving on to Jade at Qualis then, please, for the next presentation.
Thanks, Debbie. And yeah, hi everyone as well. I hope everyone's having a good Monday so far. Just share my screen here to get started. So yeah, it's really interesting, some of the data, Katherine, that you've just shared there as well. And actually, what I'll do here is build on some of that from a slightly different lens from our perspective. And I'll go into some of the details around Qflow and what Qflow does a little bit later. But as a brief background to myself and to Qflow in terms of who we are. Myself, Jade, I'm one of the co-founders of Qflow, and we've been working in the sector now for just shy of 8 years. We're a technology platform, so have a slightly different lens on this in terms of helping contractors mostly to collect data on all their individual waste movements, as well as materials that are coming in as well. So hence why we kind of cross over into that space of trying to find out information to do with things like wastage rates and how can this information be used to support that transition towards a more circular economy, amongst many other things. So I'll start off by running through a little bit of data that we had from an industry waste report we released about 2 years ago now. So this is over several hundred different projects we've operated on in the UK so far, and what that data is telling us at an aggregated level. And then what I'll do is I'll go into a little bit of detail in terms of the system and how that's helped certain contractors to better monitor their waste, as well as the information we found on what some of the potential hidden costs of waste really are within the industry, outside of or alongside other research that already exists, as Katherine touched upon earlier as well. So to get started then, obviously slightly preaching to the choir here, I appreciate, with regards to our understanding of the fact that obviously as a wider industry, we know that there's huge contributions towards the country's overall waste as it stands, but also the high proportion of that goes into landfill specifically as well. So we'll touch on that with some of our findings from the industry's waste report from a few years ago as well, which kind of builds on Katherine's point around landfill still being a critical issue, unfortunately, in this space, despite a lot of the improvements in policy and the tightening of things like landfill tax or otherwise. I think the biggest statistic that always baffles me is the proportion of construction materials that go into different types of projects as raw materials, as new materials to be used, and end up going straight into waste, which I think, alongside the fact that we're on the backdrop of a sector which contributes a huge amount to waste anyway, the fact that, and we're also operating on extremely tight margins on projects as well, the fact that there's so much untapped value that goes into a project and then goes simply out again is whilst it's a problem in this guise, is also a huge opportunity in terms of, well, what can we do to, even if we minimize that number by arguably even a small fraction, what implications can that have, not just on waste but also on project margins as well, which we'll come back onto later on. So just to give some high level views there. So this is taken directly from it's the waste industry report, which is available on Qflow's website. We released this about 2 years ago now, and this is across approximately 120 or so different construction projects at the time between about 2019 to 2023. And what this shows us is we're trying to break down the different waste types between different sectors. It is frustratingly difficult to kind of get hold of this data more widely across the whole sector, because it's not necessarily widely broken down outside of DEFRA's own data between things like different sectors, different size projects, what the profiles look like over time. So within the report, we've tried to eke this out a little bit. But here you can kind of see what the different profiles look like across these different sectors. And no surprise with infrastructure, soils being a critical component of all the waste that obviously comes out as part of those types of construction. And then, of course, you see different levels of separation between different types as well. So fit outs, generally speaking, tend to have a little bit more segregation as part of the waste is coming off, or at least that's reflected in this data anyway. But still huge amounts of this kind of average construction or average C&D type waste, where obviously everything's kind of grouped together and we don't get the granularity in terms of how things are separated out based on EWC code. So it kind of reinforces a point Katherine was making earlier as well, that granularity is actually, by virtue of it being quite difficult to get hold of, it is also very difficult to then match up all the quantities of materials that are coming in with all the waste going out to really understand specific wastage rates. Nonetheless, what we can also tell by combining the data on what's going out from these different types of construction projects with data on the waste returns from each of the waste facilities where that waste ends up, is the recovery percentages or the waste management routes of how that waste is being treated. So again, to kind of reinforce the point with high levels of soils, whilst a lot of that can be repurposed in different ways or used for capping or other purposes, there's still quite a high portion that is sent to landfill within the infrastructure sector. And then you can see how that varies between the other subsectors there as well. So fit out, interestingly, also has one of the lowest rates that we saw at the time across the sample projects we're looking at for disposal to landfill. And actually, if I go on to this this next piece here, some of the key things that we kind of took away from looking at this data, the first one being a little bit obvious, but actually needs a little bit more interrogation, I think, with regards to how much segregated waste has an impact or a direct impact on the recovery route of that waste. So I think there's a lot of, historically, there's been a lot of assumptions around, the more segregated the waste, the higher the recovery rates. And we do see that in part with the example of fit out type schemes, where there seems to be, again, based on what the data is telling us, slightly more segregation of waste, and commercial having quite a bit of that as well. But actually the statistical significance of whether or not that directly correlates and has an impact on the overall recovery rate or diversion from landfill is still a little bit unknown. And the reason I mention this is because there tends to be a lot of strategies around waste management on different projects focused on segregation. And I think whilst it's important, I don't think you should take away from other strategies that can be taken to either have a more of a direct impact on minimizing waste or to improve the recovery in some fashion. So learning from the residential sector, haven't gone into detail here in terms of what those learnings could be, but I do think it's an area to keep an eye on. Again, this data is telling us that out of the other sectors, that this one has the highest reuse rates when it comes to waste going off-site. So what can we take from this sector that can then potentially be applied or learnt from between other sectors as well, and how do we maximise that? And equally, how do we minimise landfill for infrastructure projects, probably being the most obvious here as well. And then to come on to the hidden costs. So the interestingly, when we were running through the data for those sort of 5 years or so that we were looking at as part of that sample set, the average diversion from landfill rate was, whilst it was fairly high, it wasn't quite as high as I think what tends to get publicised quite a lot in terms of landfill no longer being an issue in this space. And whilst there's been a huge amount of improvements over years, I think it's still worthwhile bearing in mind that, you know, the diversion from landfill rates are still not as high as they otherwise could be. And of course, with the landfill tax ever increasing, the average costs per project based on this are pretty substantial. Depending on the size of the scheme in question, of course, that number can go up or down. But alongside the cost to landfill, which is arguably an unnecessary cost depending on the type of waste that's being produced, the other type of cost alongside this is, and the biggest hidden cost around waste in what we've seen, is the hidden compliance risk. So what we worked out through for projects was looking at the compliance rates based on documentation, based on the permitting limits for different waste facilities that were accepting different types of wastes, and what the potential levels of fines could be based on the non-compliance that we were seeing across this many different projects. And it's huge. I mean, in the report, I think we list, in this case, 13.2 million of potentially unclaimed fines from waste non-compliance. So not all of these will be realised in reality. That obviously depends on the regulator and finding or uncovering some of these non-compliant risks in reality. However, the risk of that, should that materialise, is very substantial. And then alongside this, of course, you have all the logistical costs of moving waste. Now, this was actually based on I'm pretty sure it was about £500 per skip cost. But I think on the data that Katherine was just sharing earlier around I think the quoted cost per skip being about £1,300, you can see this number being a lot higher, potentially quite conservative in this slide here. So the point behind all of this is that there are various ways that the costs for waste being produced on a project kind of go under radar. And in fact, the last one on this list is probably the one that's most well understood because it has to be costed into a project, but the others less so. And I think it's one of those things, again, when we're talking about the backdrop of operating on really tight margins, presents a really good opportunity for how we can start to reduce waste, not because it is the right thing to do, although it is, but also because it has a direct impact on bottom line. The biggest hidden cost, just to touch on, that we've seen as well, is when things go wrong on site in terms of the materials coming in. And to that earlier statistic of that 13% going off straight as waste, this is where we see challenges of, you know, there could be the wrong tarmac was installed in a car park, as an example we've heard about previously, needed to be reworked later because it turns out that it was not the right level of permeability that was initially specified. And so you kind of have these individual examples of mistakes that are made or incorrect materials handling that then result in these bigger challenges later, again, both from a materials and waste perspective, but also directly for a cost impact as well, because it's not just the materials in question we're wasting time, labour, all the delays that then causes after the fact, and any potential legal costs associated when things go drastically wrong. So just to very briefly touch on Qflow's role as part of this. So like I said, as a technology provider, we have the benefit of collecting lots of data that gives us a wider lens and a more detailed lens than perhaps national statistics. But on a project by project basis, what the software is actually doing is helping contractors and teams to very simply monitor all the materials that go on and all the waste that goes off via a photograph that's taken of the delivery tickets and of the waste transfer notes. So in short, this is a sort of a brief schematic of how the system works. So with very little input, the system will then read the information, will enrich a lot of that data, do a huge amount of data cleaning, and then the system will flag when there are potential risks, both in terms of materials coming in, as well as of waste going out from a compliance perspective and other things like hitting certain thresholds and whatnot. And then all that data can then be fed into other systems, be that internal reporting systems, be that other more generalized sustainability reporting systems like Smart Waste or One Click LCA or similar. So what this means in reality, and I think this is very much sort of step one and part of step two in terms of trying to help better monitor waste, but also help minimize it. We've seen with different contractors we've worked with, this is an example from Balfour Beatty, where they have achieved very high percentage diversion from landfill rates through very active planning throughout the project, throughout the various project stages. And they had the benefit of doing this really heavily up front, which I think is what gave them the edge in being able to achieve a lot of those percentage rates further down the line. But they were able to really evidence that by collecting that granular data through systems such as smart waste, such as Qflow, feeding into other systems as well that they were using, such as smart waste or similar. Similarly, with other kinds of schemes for different types of projects, in this case, MMOs do a whole range of different kinds of schemes, and we've particularly worked with them on some more fit-out orientated projects. But again, getting granularity and trust in that data in the first instance is kind of step number one, making sure that can then be used to support strategies during the build or during future projects is obviously the longer term mission behind here as well. So I'll leave it there. Hopefully it's given a bit of a view in terms of the data that we've seen collected across different sectors and what that means, as well as some examples of how we see this implemented in reality. And yeah, more than happy to come back on to any questions later on the panel.
Thanks, Jade. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think one point particularly for me around the better segregated the waste, the more chance there is the higher rate of material recovery. And I think that kind of also is around that reticence of, is it waste or isn't it waste? And it's that intent to waste. So if it's your intent to look after that material and put it to one side carefully, it's not then waste. I know quite often for construction sites, the issue often potentially isn't even around budget, it's just literally space. And it's kind of trying to put things in place to enable that to be able to work. And also, yeah, the reducing waste being the right thing, but also you can quite clearly demonstrate how it can be the good thing for budgets and finance as well. I think there's more than enough proof to show that the efforts can be rewarded. Okay, moving on to Chloe and Salvo from McLaren then, please.
Wonderful. Thanks, Debbie. I'll just pull up the slides. There we go. Can you see those slides there?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, hello, everybody. Yeah, I guess big thank you for joining today's webinar, and obviously thank you to the previous speakers as well. It's been really interesting to kind of hear these different insights, and those cost breakdowns were really interesting, Jade. To introduce myself, I'm Chloe Sawyer. I'm one of McLaren's environmental advisors, and I'm joined today with the Principal Sustainability Manager, Salvo Gangemi. We'll be speaking today on behalf of McLaren Construction, talking about the true cost of waste, more kind of from the implementation perspective on the challenges we face on various projects, and I guess kind of how we're managing these projects as principal contractors. So starting off, just wanted to kind of give a brief overview of the amount of the waste that the construction industry is still producing. I know it's obviously been mentioned a few times already by Jade and Katherine, but just kind of giving it the perspective from McLaren's perspective. But yeah, I guess the main kind of takeaway is that the construction industry remains one of the UK's largest waste generating sectors. At McLaren, the annual waste generation varies, obviously year by year, due to project type, number of live sites, the external wider pressures as well. But again, as Jade and Katherine, as you've mentioned, there's a lot of really great statistics, but the obvious trend is that the construction waste is continuing to grow year by year. And you can see on this graph as well that the annual waste generated within the McLaren projects kind of follows that trend as well. With the exception of 2025, the annual waste that was generated in 2025 is about half of the year previous in 2024. And while that could be related to a number of variables, as I mentioned, the project type, the number of live sites, and kind of those external wider pressures, we also know that in 2025, we had a greater presence of our environmental teams and our sustainability teams. So we've been working really hard on promoting material reuse, implementing various waste management plans, and increasing that overall presence on our live sites, which is predominantly what kind of today's focus will be on. Just to kind of touch on some of the challenges that we face when it comes to waste management. The key kind of one is obviously trying to manage waste from the beginning of a project where it's typically kind of overlooked within the contract phase. It usually leads to kind of weaker obligations for the subcontractors, so they don't have a lot of, or this kind of the same responsibility for minimizing waste, managing the surplus materials, or even kind of storing things correctly. And naturally, these results in the waste kind of being generated more on site before we've even had a chance to really do anything about it or manage that process from the get-go. A lot of our ongoing challenges kind of stem from directly that, where we're relying heavily on subcontractors just to do the right thing, to follow the waste hierarchy, to minimize waste during each phase of the construction or the build or the demolition, to segregate correctly, to protect materials from damage, to kind of prevent the waste in the first place, and to use different kind of take back schemes and opportunities available to them. But because we don't necessarily have these systems in place or this support or incentives, these behaviours kind of go to the wayside. On top of that, we're seeing kind of unclear planning at the contract level. So who's actually going to be removing the waste, how that segregation is going to be achieved, and who's responsible for returning the waste documentation back to the principal contractor. And then I guess there's also the confusion around things like simpler recycling, hazardous waste segregation and the inconsistencies around that as well. And kind of mainly the waste contractors themselves not always holding those responsible for things like contamination. So, for example, in 2025, we identified 25 loads of contaminated construction and demolition waste that was going back to the waste destination. And there was no kind of notification or communication that this contamination had occurred, and therefore no kind of financial consequences either, which, obviously feels great when we're not getting any financial consequences. But in the end, that segregation didn't occur and that contamination occurred. And I think that accountability is not really there from the waste contractors as well. When we're looking at how we are tracking and measuring waste, as it's already kind of been mentioned a few times on the webinar already, but one of our biggest advantages is using Smart Waste. So thank you, Katherine, for all your work that you were doing there. Smart Waste has been really great for kind of linking projects with subcontractors with something called the Application Programming Interface, so APIs. And that allows the waste documentation to automatically be uploaded straight from the contractor onto our system. And this has been really great for kind of reducing that admin, cutting out the areas and giving us that cleaner kind of data to work with, which is kind of what you were mentioning as well, Jade. But it always stems from, this tracking only really works if we're managing the waste properly from the start. So that's why we've implemented site waste resource management plans and waste minimization plans. So using those to kind of identify the key waste streams, any opportunities for reuse, recycling schemes, and as I mentioned before, the take-back schemes to kind of reduce where the waste is being produced in the first place and thus kind of helping with the cost as well. We've also been encouraging projects to streamline waste contractors where possible. So one of our sites in Wales has a really good example of where they're just using one single contractor for all of their waste streams. And this kind of gives us that better control, better consistent reporting, cleaner waste segregation, and also kind of reduces those gaps between the providers. And then that also kind of gives us that better quality data because everything's kind of captured in the same place by the same contractor. Another thing that we're trying to promote is centralizing COSH waste. So instead of getting the subcontractors to manage their own hazardous waste, we really see the benefit in kind of taking ownership of that responsibility. So therefore reducing the risk of contamination, not getting the subbies to, it's too much effort for them to remove, one paint tin or one spray can. So taking on that responsibility is going to be improving our compliance, but also means that the COSH materials are being handled correctly every time. So I guess using this kind of technology and planning and streamlining of contractors is kind of working to reduce the waste rather than just kind of recording it as we go along. Salvo, though, I'll pass across to you.
Thank you, Chloe. If you can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. Afternoon, everyone. And so first of all, I just want to highlight some of the practical tools and processes that we can use to manage resources more efficiently on site and reduce unnecessary waste. These are simple interventions which are widely used in the built environment, but they are applied consistently and they make a noticeable difference to both cost and carbon. So first, as probably everyone knows, just-in-time delivery, bringing materials to site only when they are needed. We reduce storage issues, minimize damage, theft, and expiry. And this is especially valuable for high impact materials such as concrete, timber, and finishes. Second, we can then reallocate surplus materials across other projects or into internal stores. A shared tracker or reuse hub prevents usable materials from becoming waste. Third, many suppliers now support return schemes for example, pallets, packaging, and unused items, and even clean off carts. And obviously, this reduces disposal costs and increases circularity. And fourth, good operational resource management ensures energy, water, and consumables match actual needs. Software platforms help monitor usage in real time, identifying waste and inefficiency quickly, such as smart waste and Qflow. And finally, behavior and training remain critical. So reinforcing, as Chloe alluded earlier, the prevention, reduce, reuse, recycle, recover hierarchy, along with practical sessions on avoiding over-ordering and preventing damage, helps embed the right habits on site. Next slide, please. Thank you. In the built environment, material waste directly increases environmental impact. Managing surplus materials more efficiently reduces, as we already said, landfill, lowers embodied carbon, and makes better use of resources already on site. It also creates social value, for example, through reuse of donation materials or supporting local community projects, which is increasingly important for ESG and planning expectations. And this is actually something that we're trying to do and work together with the ASBP contractor working group. In one of our projects here in McLaren, we partner with Yes Make to ensure that some of the historic timbers from our site found a meaningful second life. Some of the fenders donated where we work to create rafters and roof slats of cuts reused to make benches and other examples. Next slide, please, Chloe. From a commercial perspective, surplus materials represent wasted cost. So what we need is really a better forecasting, storage where feasible, and reuse disposable fees and unnecessary reordering. Well-managed materials improve site safety and efficiency. Importantly, strong waste management performance now supports tender success and client expectations. We have seen a big emphasis from clients in terms of designing out waste at early stage. So less waste sent off-site reduces skip hire, transport, and landfill charges. And also surplus materials can be reused on future projects, saving the cost. Next slide, please. On this slide, I just want to talk about how closer collaboration with our suppliers and manufacturers can directly reduce waste, improve material efficiency, and ultimately make our projects more consistent and predictable. One of the biggest opportunities is standardization. When we work with suppliers early, so as Cohen mentioned, during design stage and procurement, we can agree standard product sizes and construction details across multiple projects. This reduces the number of cuts needed on site and significantly reduces the off cuts. For example, a supplier might produce plasterboard or timber components pre-cut to the dimensions we use most often, and that immediately means fewer trimming cuts, fewer mistakes, and far fewer pieces ending up in the skip. And when we are using the same standard items across projects, it becomes much easier to reuse any surplus materials elsewhere instead of storing them indefinitely or just throwing them away. There's also a direct operational benefit, so fewer ordering errors and less over specification. When science teams are confident about the standard products and dimensions, they are also less likely to overorder just in case. That reduces cost, reduces waste, and improves accuracy in our procurement data. We also see strong results from through supplier take-based schemes. This can dramatically reduce disposable costs and reduce what we send to landfill. When suppliers know exactly what material they are getting back and we know exactly how they will process it, waste routes become much easier. This not only improves our compliance, but also improves the quality of our waste reporting. And we've got some few examples on site where we um, use, for example, the pallet loop take-back scheme, where timber pallets are collected from the company and then reused. However, these schemes don't work automatically. The main challenge is contamination. Offcuts are often mixed with other materials, or they are stored on the ground where they pick up debris. And once that happens, the supplier can't take it back, and the opportunity eventually is lost. So these schemes depend on clean segregation and suitable storage, something we need the wholesale team to buy into. And another areas where suppliers are leading in is reducing packaging waste. Many are now shifting from single-use plastic wraps to reusable syringes or reusable pallet wraps. Others are moving from multiple small packaged items to consolidated bulk deliveries. That means fewer plastic bags, fewer cardboard ties, fewer cardboard boxes, and it also reduces manual handling and the problem of bins overflowing with packaging waste by midweek. Finally, none of this works without the right behaviors on site. So one of the most common issues is operatives putting the wrong waste into the wrong bin. A single piece of contamination can result in an entire load being rejected. And unfortunately, we have seen it on site. The solution is quite practical. Clear, color-coded waste systems that match the requirements of our suppliers' take-based schemes, and joint toolbox talks delivered with the supplier so the operatives hear the message consistently from both sides. Next slide, please, Chloe. Behavior change in construction is driven by the clear incentives, simple systems, and consistent reinforcement. Incentives such as reduced waste cost, share savings, or performance-linked rewards encourage better material segregation and waste reduction. I actually like the Taylor Wimpey example, as I am pretty much involved with one of their developments, and it's interesting to know that out there now they are prioritizing incentives rather than penalizing. As it actually doesn't work to me. Awareness is raised through design inductions, toolbox talks, and clear bin signage, as I mentioned before, and visible waste data that shows the cost and environmental impact of group practices. To maintain change, these behaviors must be embedded into standard site procedures and subcontractor requirements, supported by leadership monitoring and recognition of good practice, making waste reduction part of normal site culture rather than just an add-on. As Chloe mentioned earlier, we have produced a site waste management plan bespoke for our projects. We also work closely with the environmental team and the sustainability team to deliver sustainability on site and environmental on site induction. And then we also have an initiative called Spot It, Shout It campaign to raise awareness on environmental spillages as well as health and safety. And that's me, us. Thank you, Debbie.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, really interesting examples there. And I think that clarity of who's responsible for the materials and documentation throughout the whole process, I think feels a really key thing. And that simple interventions, often they are quite simple, but it's the consistency of how they're applied from both sides, from the contractor and the subcontractor. Keith, I'll pass over to you now for your case study. Thank you.
Hi everybody, just gonna share my screen here. Hello, everyone. Thanks very much to Debbie and all at the ASBP for inviting me here today to speak to you. I'm going to give you a bit of a run through of a specific initiative that we had on one of our projects in Ireland, specifically looking at waste and plastic and packaging and how better we can manage it on site and how we can drive best practice within construction. Quick intro to myself. I'm Group Supply Chain Sustainability Manager with Sisk, so multifaceted role looking at all subtopics across environmental, social, and governance, but circular economy being a real key part of my role and driving circular economy initiatives on our projects, looking at waste reduction schemes as well and how we can better our waste through design and on-site management as well. So just a bit of a brief of, I guess, the background to bring you into the initiative. So in Ireland, very much like the UK, we have a big problem in terms of our waste in construction, and 50% of all waste in Ireland is attributed to construction. These are EPA statistics, so it's quite stark, and only 32% of plastics in Ireland are recycled. So a huge gap there that needs to change. The packaging in construction sites, so up to 50% of skips on construction sites can be taken from up by plastic packaging. That comes from the Supply Chain Sustainability School. We've done a study on plastic packaging or packaging specifically a few years and released a really good report on that. And then just below the dashed line is a bit more specific to Sisk. So a huge percentage of our skips that we see annually are mixed waste in our Irish projects. A little bit better in the UK. So something we're really trying to change is that, I guess, mindset when it comes to waste management across our sites and how better projects can set up. And this initiative showed with a bit of outside the box thinking and a bit of resources and investment, you can really make a change. And then, of course, within construction, we work on very tight margins within all projects. And, for a company to be able to be spending close to €2 million on mixed waste skips just in Ireland alone is a significant chunk of any company's turnover. So a bit on the proposal with this initiative. Brought it to the project. I'll run through the project just after this. It was really what we're trying to do is aim to send zero plastics to landfill. We are pretty good in terms of that. In terms of, I guess sending recycling waste as much as we can. But what we really wanted to focus on was sending that 0%, so 100% of all waste on our project would be recycled. Minimize use of mixed waste skips, obviously went through those statistics earlier. Create best-in-class waste management area. Become the first construction project or construction company to achieve zero plastic to landfill. Introduce circular thinking into plastic disposal, so not just sending our plastics to waste to energy, but how can we introduce circular thinking and recycle our plastics, and engage with supply chain as well, of course, where we are just a contractor and we have to bring our subcontractors, our waste management contractors in on this as well for this to work. And just a bit of alignment internally. So we have a strategy breaking new ground. This focused on our net zero. So scope 3, obviously waste sits in that category. And then we had different targets with our sustainability roadmap. Target 13 probably is most specific to this, which is eliminate SUPs on all operations. Ambitious targets, but something that really kind of drove this initiative initially. So just a bit of background on the project itself. It's a large data center project just out West Dublin, Grange Castle, development of 2 data centers and a large project, just 8.7 hectares, but not a lot of site there really. Every bit of space was taken up. but large scale in terms of workers on site, 950 average workers on site every day. So you can imagine the amount of waste that's being produced on that site, not just through construction, but through general waste as well with those workers. So the process that we looked at with the Zero Plastic Landfill initiative was, we have to start at source, and how do you make it easy as possible for your subcontractors who are on the work face and how they can better manage waste. Chloe and Salvo touched on it there in terms of that subcontractor piece is critically important for any main contractor. So with toolbox talks and engaging with the subcontractors on site, we also brought in color-coded bins. So it made it easier for our subcontractors on the work face to see where waste is to be disposed of. I think there were about 6 different colors we had dotted around the different work faces, varying from metal, wood, plastics, dry mixed, mixed waste, and biodegradables there as well. And then what we look to do is when those wastes were disposed of at the work face, when it was brought to our waste management areas, we were in a better place to segregate it then at source within that waste management area. We invested in balers for the site. So we bought in 2 balers. I'll have a picture of it later. One was for soft plastics, your polyethylenes, and then the other one is for your cardboard. So they produce a 50 kg baler. So essentially taking that plastic out of the mixed waste skips or any skip and compacting it down, because we all know the amount of space that our plastics take up in those skips. Polystyrene was something we were very, very keen on finding a solution to. Polystyrene is 98% air, but in terms of volume, it can fill up a skip very, very quickly. And it has a bounce back in terms of you trying to crush the waste and make more space. You can't crush polystyrene essentially. So we contacted a waste contractor located in Offaly, Waste Matters, who take polystyrene and they will chip it on site. They bring in a mobile unit, they'll chip it on site and compact it into more manageable bricks. And I have a picture later on. Those bricks can then be put onto pallets and then they're sent off for further recycling into insulation. The bale plastics, again, Waste Matters were able to take them and they were able to turn them into usable products such as flower pots. We had sleepers and ducting chambers as well was another one. So one big thing with this initiative is it's all well and good, but you have to get recognition for the work that you're putting in really. And Responsible Plastic Management, they're a social enterprise located in Belfast. They have a certification scheme called Zero Plastic to Landfill. And we engaged with them early in this process, and they brought us along in terms of, different advice here and there. They conducted an audit of our site and also conducted audits of our waste contractors. And August 24, I think it was, we achieved Zero Plastic to Landfill. So just a picture paints 1,000 words. These are balers, just starting on the left here. We have our cardboard baler and plastic baler and housed in a good clean unit. There in the middle, they're just an idea of the 50 kg bales that we were able to package up. They were taken by our waste contractors for then to be recycled back into products. And then just an idea then of the different segregation we had on site: plasterboard, metals, woods, and a number of others. Just a bit of circularity. Obviously, those plastics was key to how we drove this initiative. So Waste Matters, we visited their site and they showed us some of the products they're able to make. One of the products that we were interested in, we purchased, were those barriers that were able to be put up around the site in order to direct construction traffic. The flower pots were great, really, really cool product to be made out of recycled plastic. They're also we were able to buy a pallet of them for a local school, St. Ronan's, which we donated a pallet of flower pots. So a real good initiative there in terms of that outcome. Just a bit of numbers, just to give you an idea. So these numbers they're probably gone up now, if I'm honest, just since I created this slide. I would say this was probably maybe about 6 months old, but 15 tons of soft plastics recycled at the Vantage Centre in 18 months. 6 tons of polystyrene was recycled, and as I said earlier, 98% air is polystyrene is 98% air, so you can see the volume of polystyrene which was recycled on our project. One of the big things, obviously, with this webinar is about the reduction of costs. So we did see a 35% reduction in skip costs from our prelim budgets, and I'll run through that in a slide later. We're the first contractor to achieve zero plastic to landfill certification. Again, I mentioned about the flower pots being donated, and then a 0% of waste sent to landfill at the Vantage project. Just a number of our supply chain partners that we worked with. And if you're wondering why there's a big Olympic-sized swimming pool picture on a waste presentation, it's just to give you an idea of the volume of polystyrene that we're talking about here. So 6 tons of polystyrene can fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and it can also create insulation for 82 semi-detached, 3-bed semi-detached houses. So just to give you an idea of the volume that we're dealing with here. So just some achievements and that we made with this initiative. We were Best ESG Sustainability Initiative of the Year at the National Property Awards in Ireland. We also won Innovative Points for the CCS, and we had multiple nominations for different awards across the group, across Ireland as well. Give you a bit of an idea of the different waste management areas that we had. So their top left is at source with our subcontractors. You can see the various different bins. Just makes it a bit easier. And don't get me wrong, although it is all color coded, you do have to keep on pushing that initiative and really kind of drive home and engage with your subcontractors almost daily, really to hammer home the message. Our foreman on site, John Murray, done incredible work. Our contracts manager, Ian Thompson, and Donald Boyle, when he was with Sisk section engineer, done really, really great work driving that on the site. The bottom on left there just gives you an idea of the waste management area that we had in site. Obviously, not every project can have a waste management area like this. Probably one of the reasons why we've such high percentage of mixed waste skips is because a lot of Sisk sites are urban environments. But that's something that we're keen to use this blueprint to kind of drive that waste segregation and manage those urban sites a lot better. Sorry, that video, there's supposed to be a video on the right hand side, but we invested in a tipper attachment for telehandlers. So it made it actually, it had a health and safety reason as well, because a lot of times with these bins, they'd be just strapped to a telehandler or a digger and lifted up, emptied out. Whereas we invested in this tipper, it was able to just go above the skip and then just tip it open, bring it back down nice and safe. Something that we're keen on investing further in more projects. Just a bit of an idea and just kind of some cool things that happened on site. Those electric cable drums were brought back to the actual manufacturer of the cables. We contacted them. He said absolutely take them all back, and said that there's not enough people actually contact them to bring them back. Something we're hoping to do is open up a bit more in a partnership with them. And then on the right hand side is just absolutely incredible, the workmanship on this picture. So we had these pallets and on site that, essentially we're just going to be going to a wood skip or be reused and brought back to manufacture. But one of the crane drivers on the project, who obviously is a bit of a handyman, asked the foreman, John Murray, could he take them? And 2 weeks later, he sent John this picture. So he built his kids their own little playground and built a shed all out of waste pallets and wood that came from that site. So incredible stuff there. Something else that we're looking at on this project, but also in Sisk, is Loop Your Spare. So it's a material exchange platform. There is a few material exchange platforms out there, but we're hoping Loop Your Spare will be a real kind of driver for change and circularity within Sisk. And Happy Earth, who are an Irish company, so they actually make medical grade PPE, but it's all biodegradable. So no plastic is used. It can all be put in your compostable bin. So we're engaging with Happy Earth about potentially buying in some overshoes, which can replace our single-use plastic overshoes, which I know across the board, different contractors use them on different sites, people walking through offices. But these will be able to be disposed of in a food waste bin. And then I see you're coming on, Debbie, to push me on, but I'll run through this 2 minutes. Legacy here, we became Zero Plastics Landfill certified at our head office in Dublin. And then our Man City project at the Etihad Stadium, they also achieved Zero Plastic Landfill certification. And then just an idea of the costs involved, very, very high overview. So initial budget was 645,000. Our actual cost of skips was 350,000. So huge reduction in skip costs on that project. And even with the capital investment and labour costs, we're still looking at a saving of just 10.5 grand. That is me, Debbie. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much, Keith. And just on that last slide with the costs as well, as people get more used to doing it and it's more embedded, you'd hope that perhaps that cost would the benefit would increase even more so. And I think the visualization of your Olympic swimming pool with your 6 tons of polystyrene, it's kind of like the whole 6 ton of feathers kind of analogy. You just can't really get your head around it, how something so light you can actually have enough for it to be 6 tons, which just is crazy, that amount of volume. If the panel can all pop their cameras on. Thank you very much for answering some of the questions as we've gone along in the Q&A. I think one thing I was keen for you all to do is just to have a key highlight, a key takeaway for people listening that they could bring back to their organisations to reduce waste in their organisations. I don't know if you can just sort of give me your key highlight before we get into a couple of questions. Kath, do you want to start?
I think it's just giving waste a real visibility. It's hidden, or it's an accepted cost at the moment, as we all know. Waste management contractors, that they're not poor people. So I've been banging on about this for a long, long time, and I don't know, it still doesn't just get the attention it deserves. I don't know how to fix that. If anyone's got any bright ideas, let us know. But obviously, better data, better visual of it, can always help.
Thank you. Jade?
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. I think probably a popular opinion and an unpopular opinion. So firstly, with regards to this whole, how can we quantify the cost of it? I think from a contractor's perspective, get QSs and commercial teams more involved in the conversation around this in terms of broadcasting what the actual costs are on projects, because everyone does cost for this. The costs are there. It's just highlighting those and picking that out to piece that picture together. I think that's the challenge that people are struggling with, not misunderstanding the fact that it's important and costs exist around this. And then the second one is, I think it was in one of the other Q&A, one of the questions that came up as well, from a client sort of owner developer standpoint, bake this into contracts. If you want changes to be made in terms of certain targets to be hit beyond diversion from landfill, then bake it for the start and make sure that there are ways of monitoring against that, should that not necessarily be hit.
Thanks. McLaren, I don't know if Salvo or Chloe want to take it.
I'm happy to go, Chloe. And for me, I would say probably the biggest levers is, as I mentioned multiple times, earlier intervention, because waste that is generated and designing long before it appears on site. So the earlier we act and we plan, the better we can have a chance to reduce the waste on site. And also in terms of surplus materials, I would say collaboration is paramount. And I know as a principal contractor working with other contractors could be a sort of conflict of interest, but working together, partnering together, we can actually ensuring the surplus materials doesn't go into waste. They can actually be reused. So when it comes to surplus materials, we can just share it, donate it, buy it, sell it. And the support you guys are giving our ASBP through the circular economy contractor working groups is absolutely key.
Thank you. Keith, what would be your key takeaway?
Something I always think about is our QS on that Vantage project, Vedas, and he was the one that done that prelim budget, and he couldn't believe the savings that were being made with the segregation that we were implementing. And he, although he was in charge of it, he's taken away that next project he's on, the first thing he's doing is implementing the investment in this waste management area. So I think a key people to get involved, and I know it's mentioned, is the commercial and QSs. And you have to show them these initiatives and the savings that can be made. But you also have to frighten them in terms of the costs of the waste that's going to be on their sites and the waste that is the cost on the business. So yeah, I think commercial and QSs are key to driving waste management on sites.
Thank you. And we will be, one of the questions came up, we will be sharing the slides afterwards as well. Katherine, I think one of the questions they said you wanted to answer live. What were the main challenges tracking the ready-mix concrete flows and outflows?
Yeah, so this was the wastage rates project we did. It was so difficult to get any actual data. So we knew what batches were being done on site for ready mix concrete, but you could not then equate that to what was going off site because it would be a load of other stuff as well mixed in with that skip, inert skip, for example. I also think with ready mix concrete, a lot of it would have just been if there was extra surplus requirements, it probably would have just been crushed up on site and used for other purposes. So not necessarily a waste in that effect, but it was a waste to what its intended use was. So again, it's just so difficult to get good data, really.
Thanks. Next question, what are the speakers' views on trade-offs between waste reduction and material reuse? Particular example, they're relying on just-in-time delivery, might reduce waste on projects, but reclaimed materials can't easily deliver a just-in-time model. Anyone want to take that?
I mean, I'm happy to give an opinion on this one. I think in that particular example, leveraging reclaimed materials is going to be a major positive. I think when you look at the waste hierarchy, waste reduction is always at the top. But when we talk about material reuse, I think that's usually in the guise of what's going off and can it be reused versus recycled or disposed of. If there's the opportunity to reuse kind of stuff coming in, then that's generally going to be a preferred route, I would say, amongst other logistical optimizations you can make, especially when you're trying to balance in like the carbon impact of those different options, as well as the direct waste impact. That's my personal opinion on it.
Anyone else wants to chip in? Yeah, I think from a storage perspective, I think one of the big things with just in time is protecting the material and storage and damage. So I guess kind of trying to balance the two of having as good a storage and protection for those materials as possible to minimize waste, and then also where possible have the just-in-time model to complement that. I think a couple of questions for you, Keith. Current UK regulation directly incentivizing investment into single-use packaging alternatives into construction? And what led you to focus on plastic packaging as opposed to other materials, which might make up a large proportion of construction waste and have a much higher recycle value?
Um, Hard to answer the first part of that, if I'm honest, in terms of the current UK regulation. I would say there is certainly in terms of the EU packaging directive is coming through, and that's going to be a big game changer in terms of single-use plastics and single-use packaging, and that'll drive a lot more recycling. I would say the UK probably is leading a lot of that anyways, in terms of reducing single-use plastics. And I think it's just up to construction really to pick up that mantle and, engage with supply chain and see what we can do to reduce packaging coming to site in the first place. And then what led us to focus on plastic packaging? I suppose, I mean, plastic is a major issue in across the board, not just in construction. But in terms of skips on site, you just go to any project across the world, really, a huge amount of volume of your skips is taken up with plastic packaging or cardboard. So really what we wanted to focus on was how can we reduce that volume that is going into our skips? What better initiatives can we do to recycle that plastic? And then also engaging with the supply chain upstream, the material producers, the merchants, how can we prevent the plastic actually arriving on site in the first place? So yeah, full value chain, look at that really.
Thanks. And I don't know if material reuse guy, you want to ask your question, if you want to come on to mic. I don't know if you're there. Anybody there? Hi. Because that wasn't quite sure. If you just ask your question directly, I think that's easier.
Yeah, sorry for the Zoom. It's Brad Guy, not material reuse. I don't know why it does that. I think the question is self-explanatory. I've tried to do this in the US with LEED project data and other data. Hard to get non-green building data because the granularity of reporting is zero. So has anyone tried to just look at project factors, so, upstream, where we might make interventions most effective?
I can have a good. Hi, Brad. Haven't spoken to you for a while. I know Brad. Yeah, so it's quite hard to get that data again. So in terms of it would be good to look at, what credits BREEAM projects get, for example, and do a sort of comparison of them against sort of projects which don't have BREEAM, for example. When I was at BRE many moons ago, we did a few sort of live case studies looking at the different of type of construction on terms of waste, the different types of contract, for example, different types of building forms, standardization and stuff like that. But it would be really nice if there was just a lot more research or big data projects or something in this area, because most of the work I know that's been gone on is years old. Contractors may be doing it, but I'm not necessarily sure that they're sharing it.
Thank you. So we're just ticked over into 2 o'clock now, so I don't want to keep everybody longer than the allocated time. So as I say, the presentation slides will be available to be distributed following the event. Thank you ever so much again to Keith from Sisk, Jade from Qualis Flow, Salvo and Chloe from McLaren, and Katherine from Reusefully for your really interesting presentations. I think there's definitely a lot to take away there, people to take back into their businesses and have a long, hard look at their waste again. So yeah, thanks ever so much again, everybody, and have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.